Hi, my name is Jeff, and I'm a sinner saved by grace. And that's my story. I'm sticking to it. You can be seated. Happy Easter. Yeah, I tell you what, in the early church, they would say this. They would say, He is risen, and the followers of Jesus would answer back, He is risen indeed. So let's try it one time. He is risen. You see, this idea of Easter, of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, God Himself even, dying on a cross, being really, really dead, and then being raised to life again after 3 days, is the story of Easter. And the early church staked its life, its existence on this claim that Jesus Christ was who He said He was, and that Jesus Christ really did raise from the dead. Now, 2,000 years after the fact, it's easy for us to kind of miss this and to go, okay, Easter is about Easter eggs and fluffy bunnies and dressing up or whatever and coming to church. And I'm really glad you're here. Thanks for joining us today at worship to hear this story. To hear this story, the good news of Jesus Christ, who is risen indeed. And yet, I want to try to get you to reimagine this idea. You know, around our culture, around here, usually the way a funeral goes is this. You say goodbye to someone you love dearly, a good friend, family member. And some of you may have done that recently, and I'm sorry for your pain, because it's so hard. And we usually here, in this culture around here, we usually have a visitation of some sort, where you go and you remember the person, you talk about them, tell stories about them, and you reminisce. And then you come to the moment of the funeral service. And you take some time and you have a service that reminds you of the good news of Jesus and that resurrection matters and all that. And we say goodbye to the person, usually at a gravesite. And the goodbyes are so hard. And then we go eat fried chicken. That's just kind of how it works, right? You go to some kind of church place, a fellowship hall somewhere, and you have fried chicken, and you hang out. And so let's just imagine for a minute that you've said goodbye to a good friend whose name is John, maybe a family member, and you said goodbye to John, and you've gone through the funeral, and you've gone through this whole process, and you've said goodbye to John, and you've gone to the grave site, you've eaten the fried chicken, and you've headed back, and you're still remembering, you're still in the pain of this, and a few days later, a friend comes to you and says, "Hey, John is alive." What would you say back to them? "You're nuts. I was at the funeral. He looked really, really dead. In fact, I'm pretty sure he was. He looked horrible." I mean, everybody says, "Oh, they look good." No, they don't. They look dead. Okay. And so you know that he's really dead, and you know he's really gone. And so this unimaginable, inconceivable thing that John would raise from the dead would come back out of the casket, back from even being cremated, and he's back here in the flesh. Are you kidding me? No way, it can't happen. It's a physical impossibility, isn't it? And so that culture in Jesus' day was no less amazed by this good news that this Jesus is risen. He's risen indeed. And it was shocking news. It was news that the early church, this movement of Jesus Christ, would build itself around. It was the news they shared with each other, and they would say this: He is risen indeed. And it was an identifier of people of the way, people that would follow Jesus Christ. And one of the early persecutors of the early church called the Way, a person that hated the news of Jesus, who, matter of fact, who refused to believe the news that Jesus was raised again, was a fellow named Paul. Paul persecuted Jesus. We were introduced to Paul in a writing in the New Testament, part of our Bible, where it says about Paul, his old name was Saul, that he was holding the cloaks of people that were killing followers of Jesus. That his deal was to go town to town to snoop out followers of Jesus, bring them outside the town, and to have them killed. And he was overseeing this murder of Christ followers who believed that Jesus had risen. He had risen indeed. But Saul's life was miraculously changed in an encounter with Jesus Christ where he says of himself, "I saw Jesus Christ." And he became perhaps the most famous, influential follower of Jesus Christ ever. A person who persecuted this news and persecuted the way, who became an advocate for the way and a celebrator and a champion of the way, and he writes part of the New Testament. He writes a lot of the New Testament. A lot of the books and the writings of the New Testament come from a guy who used to kill Christians to a person that became a follower of Jesus Christ himself. And he writes this in the book of 1 Corinthians. He says, I write to you of this is of first importance, that Jesus Christ, the Son of God, died on a cross. He was buried for 3 days, and he rose again from the dead. And that Peter saw it, and then the rest of the 12 saw it, and then over 500 people, many of whom are still alive, witnessed this Jesus risen again. And then he came to me, and I saw him as the least of the followers of Jesus. I saw him too. And this is of first importance. See, this was the good news that the whole church was founded on. This good news, radical good news that Jesus Christ raised from the dead. That's the story of Easter. Now, most of you know that story. Even if you're not around church a lot, you probably still have an imagination of that story inside of you somewhere. So here's the big question of today, so what? What difference does it make that there was Easter? What difference does it make? This is the first part of the good news. This is why it matters. Because if Jesus raised from the dead, as he claimed he did, and as our church believes that he did, then he's the most powerful person that ever lived on our planet. And when the most powerful person that's ever lived on the planet teaches something, we can trust it, right? Now, if Jesus didn't raise from the dead, then he was just a freak. He was just a liar. He was a lunatic, and it doesn't matter. Because all of his teachings you could then discount, say, well, he was just a nice guy, he was a prophet, and you can kind of throw him aside. You can treat him like another prophet or a good teacher and treat his teachings at that level. However, Easter changes all that because we believe that Jesus Christ did indeed raise from the dead, which validates his claim to be God himself, the one that could overcome death, the one that could overcome the hard things of life, that this resurrection of Jesus gives us a hope and a promise that someday everything that's wrong will be made right, and that Jesus Christ himself ushers in a new way of interacting with God. See, Jesus taught that God is here among us right now, and that it's possible to have a relationship with God, an interactive fellowship with God, the creator of the universe, that you and me as ordinary people could interact with God and experience his presence and his power in life. Isn't that good news? And so this teacher wasn't just ordinary. He wasn't just human. He was God, and he was man both. And his resurrection from the dead validates everything he ever taught. It validates everything he taught us about who God is and how God operates in the universe. So the story of Easter matters because it validates the claims of Jesus Christ to be the Son of God, to be the one that could make us right with God. So I want you to just take in this good news of Jesus that way today and to understand that it's an amazing story. And I want to go into some of the teachings of Jesus because, again, this is why I want you to understand the teaching of Jesus, this greatest, most powerful, wisest God person that ever lived. And when he teaches, we should listen, right? And when he teaches, we can trust because he raised from the dead. So today, I think the story of Easter is a story about a father and his children and a porch light and coming home. That's what I think Easter is really about. And so to set that up, I want to take you into a teaching about Jesus and then a teaching of Jesus. Here's the teaching about Jesus. This is from the writer of the book of John. And it says this, that Jesus went to his own people. But his own people didn't accept him. They wouldn't accept his message. However, he gave the right to become children of God to everyone who believed in him. That is, to everyone who accepts his teachings and his way of life. He gives us the right to become children of God. And that's really good news. To be accepted into God's family and to be embraced, get this, as if you were Jesus himself. That's what Jesus made possible. For you and me to be accepted and loved into the family of God, into the arms of God, as if we were Jesus himself. That's the great news of Easter. That's the great news of Jesus Christ. Now, I want you to be able to follow along with me and to maybe make some notes and do that. We have these sermon note cards, or these worship guides that we've given you. By the way, if you're brand new here, a word to our guest is inside this. Don't read this now, read it later, but everything you need to know about this is here. Now, Julie Fuson is here. If you didn't get one of these, would you just let her know? And she's going to bring these around to you so you can follow along. The sermon notes are on the back. So anybody that needs one, just let her know and she'll bring them to you. And I want you to follow along with us and perhaps make some notes if you would like. And we're not trying to embarrass you. We're just going to make sure you got the tools you need to do this. So, that's the teaching about Jesus. He came to his own, but they didn't accept him. And Jesus was a Jew. He came for the Jews and to people that were religious and that had an understanding of God, a very religious understanding of God that had grown up over thousands of years of trying to understand who God was. And the Jews were people that had a devout respect for God. We could take a lesson or two from them. They were so devout and so religious about God that they wouldn't even say his name. They created a name for God. We would say it as Yahweh, and we would pronounce it, but they wouldn't even utter the name of God. That's how much respect they had for God. So that's the people that Jesus came to, people that were very religious and who loved God the best they knew how, but they did it in a very religious way. So that's who Jesus came to. But those people began to reject Jesus' teaching. The religious people, the Jewish people, wouldn't hear the message of Jesus. It was hard for them to understand, and so they rejected him. So that's the story about Jesus. Now, I want to take you into a story that Jesus told. And I want to give you the setting for this story, first of all. In Luke 15, 1 and 2, it tells us this, that Jesus taught among people that were not religious. It says it this way: now the tax collectors and sinners were all drawing near to Jesus. And the Pharisees and the scribes grumbled, saying, this man receives sinners and he eats with them. Now, for us today, we might say, well, what's the big deal about tax collectors? Well, they hated them. The tax collectors represented Rome, which was an occupying power in the time of Jesus, and they had their thumbs on the heads of the Jews, and the Jews just wanted them gone. So the tax collectors represented the worst and the thing that the Jews hated the most. And then there were other types of people that were very drawn to Jesus, and they were people that were outside of the religious camp. They were people that either were not Jews at all or that were bad Jews. These were ones that weren't practicing the religion of the day. They weren't good people. And yet Jesus, in his teachings as he traveled and he taught and he healed people, began to attract this sort of people in droves. They gathered close to him. Not only did they come to him and he would teach them and heal them, but it says, the scripture tells us, that he actually sat down and had meals with them. In the Jewish culture, in the Jewish imagination, if you had a meal with somebody, you were endorsing them as a person of worth. You were giving the person worth. You were giving them validation. You were maybe even saying, hey, this person is worthy of my respect. No good Jew would ever do that. No true God-following, God-honoring Jew would ever accept someone who wasn't practicing the religion earnestly and who wasn't trying to follow God through this religious system they'd created. If they didn't do that, you weren't welcome at the table. You weren't invited into this fellowship. So here's who Jesus is talking to. Here's the people he's reaching out to. It says the religious people, they said they were grumbling. You know what grumbling sounds like? From a distance, it's just it's like a dog chewing on a bone. Grumbling and complaining, and they so mad at Jesus because, man, he's accepting these people that we can't stand, and we don't like that he's doing that, and they just grumble and complain and whine and moan. And this man receives them and he eats with them, and that's horrible. He should never do that. And so Jesus introduces, remember who he's talking to, religious people are grumbling. The people that are sinners and outside of the religious camp are with Jesus, and they're celebrating and they're enjoying this good news. And Jesus tells three stories, three parables. A parable is a story that Jesus would tell. It had an earthly meaning that was easy to understand, but it had a heavenly, deep meaning about the truth about God. And so Jesus tells three stories. He tells the story of a lost sheep and about a shepherd that goes looking for the lost sheep. And how the shepherd rejoices when he scoops that lost sheep up, puts him on his shoulders and brings him home. And how the father rejoices, how the shepherd, who's representative of the father, rejoices. Now, by the way, the greatest, most powerful person that ever lived is telling us something about God. Easter matters because you can trust the teachings of Jesus. So if Jesus teaches us something about God, do you believe you could trust that you could hang your life on that teaching? You do, don't you? I hope, because Jesus raised again from the dead, so that validates his teaching. So Jesus is teaching about the Father to people that are grumbling and to people that are happy, both. The first story, the shepherd, represents the father who goes out looking for the lost sheep. The second story Jesus tells is a story of a woman. Interesting that he allows the father to be seen with the heart of a woman who has 10 coins and she loses one. And she goes looking for that lost coin, and like only a woman can do. Oh yeah. She turns the house upside down. I mean, she is freaking out about the coin. The guy's like, I'm going to bed. I'm done. But the woman's like, I'm staying up. So she says she lights a candle, and she goes looking for that coin. And she finally finds it, and finds it. And then she's celebrating this good news because, hey, what was lost is now found. And that's the heart of the Father. What's lost is found. And he goes looking for it, and he's active, and he pursues it. The shepherd and then the woman looking for these lost things. But then Jesus shares a third story that we find in Luke chapter 15, 11 through 32. Charles Dickens says of this story that Jesus shares that it's the greatest short story of all time. Charles Dickens was a pretty good writer himself. He says this is the greatest short story of all time. It says more than any other short story ever. And inside of this story, you're going to be reminded of what Daughtry sings about in a song called Home. Be careful what you wish for, because you just might get it all. You just might get it all. So I want you to hear this story. I want you to listen to the story. I'm just going to read it to you. And you hear this story as best you can, imagining where Jesus was sharing it with people that are grumbling and people that love him, both. People that are standing outside of Jesus, basically judging him with their arms folded and scorning him, and others that are enthralled with the teaching, who've been far from God and how he's welcoming them home. So listen to this story. And Jesus said, there was a man who had 2 sons. And the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the share of property that is coming to me. And he divided his property between them. Not many days later, the young son gathered all that he had and took a journey into a far country. And there he squandered his property in reckless living. And when he had spent everything, a severe famine arose in that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into his fields to feed pigs. And he was longing to be fed with the pods that the pigs ate, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, How many of my father's hired servants have more than enough bread, but I perish here with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants. And he arose, and he came to the father. But while the young son was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion and ran and embraced him and kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, Bring quickly the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet, and bring the fattened calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and he's found, and they began to celebrate, to have a party like none other. Now his older son was in the field. And as he came and drew near to the house, he heard music and dancing. And he called one of the servants and asked what these things meant. And he said to him, "Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fattened calf, because he has received him back safe and sound." But he was angry, and he refused to go in. His father came out and entreated him. But he answered his father, "Look, all these years I've been here, and I've served you, and I've never disobeyed any of your commands. Yet you never even gave me a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours comes home, the one who's devoured all your property and he's wasted it all with prostitutes and parties, you kill the fattened calf and you throw a party for him?" And the father said to him, "Son, you've always been with me, and all that I have is yours. It was fitting that I threw a party for your brother, and we should celebrate and be glad, because he was dead, and now he's alive. He was lost, and now he's found." Jesus' story was shocking. You know it probably as the story of the prodigal son. But really, I think it would be better said if we said this, that it's the story of the prodigal father and two sons. You see, I've always thought that the word prodigal meant somebody that went far away and did the wrong things and was out there somewhere. But that's not what the word prodigal means. You know what the word prodigal means? It means lavish. It means lavish. It means outlandish. It means overwhelming grace and love. It means someone that loves way beyond reason. It means someone who has no bounds to their love. It means someone who is outrageous in how they love people and how they accept people. So this is the story of a father who has an outlandish, great big love for two sons. And it's a shocking story, isn't it? It's interesting that Jesus doesn't resolve this story either. We'll come to that later. So first of all, the story is about a father. It's about a father who's outlandish and lavish and prodigal in his love for both sons, one who goes away and one that comes home. Now, in the culture of Jesus, understand what the word father would have meant. The word father would have been someone who was highly honored and respected, and Jesus was working from and living in a culture of honor where you would revere your father. Way more than what we do in our culture. We don't have really much sense for how this really works, for what honor really is for a parent, the way they would have in this culture. In the culture of Jesus' time, there was a high respect for the head of a household. You would never disrespect your father. You would never go against your father. You would never disgrace him in any way. Now, inside of that culture of honor, there probably was a bit of a threat. I mean, just kind of an unspoken honor, respect, and fear of your father. This fear that leads to, man, I don't want to cross him, and I don't want to mess with him. I don't want to go against his wishes. I don't want to do anything that would ever harm the family reputation. This culture of honor was high, and probably this man that Jesus is talking about was wealthy, well-respected, and the communities, many of them were small communities where everybody knows the story of everybody else. Probably a farming community, and here's a wealthy farmer with sons who are working the fields and doing the things. And if life goes well for a wealthy father like that, his sons will begin to help him do the work of the farm, and they'll multiply the effectiveness so that the whole environment becomes even more wealthy, right? And the whole thing gets better and better, and this culture expands, this culture of honor, and it rises up, and the father becomes more and more blessed in the community and more revered as someone who's successful. And it's really cool to see the whole family kind of get in on the operation and make it go. It's wonderful. You would never leave home in that culture. You would add on to the father's house. You would find a wife, and you would bring her to that house, and you would begin to have children. You'd be fruitful, and you'd multiply, and you would build wealth together as a family. It's a beautiful picture. And yet Jesus says there was a younger son. And the younger son comes to the father, and he disrespects the father. You see, in this story, it would have been understood that Jesus is saying about the younger son, he's saying this. The younger son is saying to the father, I wish you were dead. I hate you. I don't want anything to do with this. I'm sick of this place. I got to do something better. I'm not going to wind up just being a farmer like you. I'm not just going to hang out here and put up with all this stuff. I want out of here, and I want out of here now. Matter of fact, I want you just to give me what's coming to me. I want my inheritance. And he's saying, I wish you were dead. It was the ultimate disrespect. It was the ultimate dishonor. Now, for those of you who are parents, if you have children far enough along to have wanted to leave home, that have wanted to get out of there, I've had this happen before in my house, where one of my children, who shall remain nameless, said a few times in her senior year, I can't wait to get out of here. And inside, I was going, and I can't wait for you to leave. Now, I don't know if that's ever happened in your house. I love her dearly. But there comes a time, sometimes, it's time to go. In our culture, it's a little different, but in that culture, man, you stayed. You stayed, and you did your thing, and you were there, and this was bad news. And that news of the son would have traveled fast, because in order for the father to give this young son what he asked for, he would have had to sell many of his assets. A third of his assets were to go to the younger son. The older son got 2/3. The younger son got 1/3. So this farmer probably would have had to liquidate a lot of his assets. It would have been a public sale of all of these assets. It would have been a public disgrace. It would have been a scandal. And yet the father says to the young son in this story, as you wish. As you wish. Jesus, who had been with God from the beginning of time, is teaching about who God is and about how God is a father. A father who will say to a son who wants to leave home and disgrace him, as you wish. Part of the shocking news is that Jesus is saying that God will let you live as you wish. As you wish. And we're shocked that the Father who says you can live as you wish, that He would grant our wish all the way into eternity, that you can choose a life with God in His house or away from God, and God will let you live as you wish. Does that make sense? It's as you wish. And you get to do it however you want, with Him or without Him. So, Jesus goes on in the story. This disrespected father is there, and then the son, the young son, goes off to begin to party like a rock star, to party like it's 1999, to party like it's none other, like he just doesn't have a care in the world. He's living the MTV lifestyle, man. Money for nothing, chicks for free. It's a good deal. He's having fun, man. It is awesome what he's just living it up. And he parties like a rock star. He gathers all these friends because he pays for every party. The word gets out, man, this guy throws some outrageous parties. He has heavenly bills. You know the rest of the song. But anyway, and so he does this whole thing, and he's doing this and all these people gather around him, and he's having the time of his life, and he's the center of attention. He's getting what he wants. He's getting everything he wished for. And it's awesome, and it's a ride until it's over. Until that fat wallet is emptied and there's nothing left. The young son Reminds me of a guy named Lee Steinberg. Anybody know who Lee Steinberg is? Lee Steinberg was an NFL player agent. He represented famous NFL athletes, and he helped establish their contracts, and therefore he got a piece of the action on every contract he established, and he accumulated a whole lot of wealth doing this. And he began to party like a rock star, literally out in the LA area, and he threw outrageous parties, sometimes $1 million parties he would throw, and invite all his friends, and there would be purple pills and prostitutes and pina coladas, baby, and it was awesome, and he just partied like a rock star. He had everything he wanted, and Lee Steinberg just partied and partied and partied until he was broke. He partied until there was nothing left. Now, you know Lee Steinberg. You just don't know you know Lee Steinberg. Lee Steinberg, his whole lifestyle was kind of put into a movie form. See if you know what the movie is. Show me the money. What's the movie? Yeah, Jerry Maguire, man, this whole movie about this guy who's an NFL player agent and making money for these guys. Jerry, show me the money. And Jerry was able to show him the money for a long time until he couldn't. That's the story of Lee Steinberg. But what the movie doesn't go on and show you is that Lee Steinberg comes to the end of himself. There's nothing left, and the party is over, and he's broke, he's bankrupt, and right now he's in court a lot because he borrowed money, 7-figure money, from some of the players he represented, and the party's way over, and he's in rehab for drug and alcohol use, and he's trying to put life back together. You see, what the beer ads don't tell you, what the alcohol ads don't show you, is the end of the party. They show you the beginning of the party when it's really good, and it's fun, and it's outstanding, and people are gathered, woo, it's fun. You do it, but it doesn't show you the rest of the story. The rest of the story winds up not so pretty. So Lee Steinberg came to the end the way the young son came to the end. Now, in that culture, that young son, broke, busted, end of himself, attaches himself to another farmer because he's used to farming lifestyle. And this other farmer looks at the young son and he realizes, dang, this kid's not worth much. I don't see much potential in him. And so he assigns him the worst possible job for a Jew that you can imagine. The job he assigns him is to take care of the pigs. If you're a Jew, you do not get around pigs. You don't think about pigs. You don't touch pigs. You don't eat pig. Nothing. You're far away from pigs as you can be. And yet this young son winds up in the pig pen feeding the pigs. Now, I know a lot about pigs because my grandfather raised pigs, and I was raised helping slop the pigs. You ever slopped a pig? Anybody ever slopped a pig? Let me see your... Not many of you. You've missed it. I mean, I'm telling you, man, there's nothing like having this rotting mess of stuff that you just kind of throw out. I mean, it's just like old food scraps. It's rotting grain. It's whatever's really horrible and nasty. You wouldn't feed any of the rest of your animals this, but pigs will eat anything. So you take this buckets of stuff I'd put on these green rubber boots and go out there to the pig pen and walk out in the middle of all that mess, and I'd pour this stuff in the trough, and the pigs all coming around, and they're in the mud this deep all the time, even in the middle of summer. They're always just nasty little animals, and they're up there eating this stuff, and they're having fun, and it's awful. You know, you're really in a bad way when that pig slop starts to look like a Happy Meal. And that's where the young son was. He was with pigs, hated, reviled animals. The worst possible job for a Jew. And he's even thinking about eating pig slop. Life takes us there sometimes, doesn't it? Sometimes we wind up in a pig pen, far away from our Father. And what once would have been totally repulsive to us starts to look good. So this young son, there, ready to eat the pig slop, comes to the end of himself, comes to his senses. And it finally hits him. You know what? Even the servants in my father's house have more than this. None of them are treated like this. They're way better off than I am right now. So I'm going to go home. I'm going to earn my way back home. I'm going to say to my father, listen, I don't even deserve to be called your son anymore. I know I've blown it. I know I've messed up. I'm coming home. And I'm just going to go home and just lay it on Dad and ask him to accept me back. And he heads home. Now what's remarkable is, Jesus tells in his story, that while the son was still a long way off, the father saw him. I've tried to imagine, well, how did the father know? How did the father know? How did he know where his son was and that he was coming home? And I've thought about this as a father myself, what it's like when my kids are far from me, how my heart hurts. Even if they're away for a good reason, I still don't like it when they're away. And I imagine that father probably was up early in the morning wondering about his son and asking about him. Now maybe he's in the house, and maybe he's like me and he's got a dog or two or three, and that dog, one of those dogs, is out kind of patrolling the grounds, you know what I'm saying, and that dog begins to bark. And that father gets up and goes, and he begins to look out. And he sees off in the distance just a little light making its way up the path toward the house. Just a little handheld candle of a light, probably early in the morning, and that light's about to go out, and this young son has been traveling for a long time to come home. And the father is watching, he's looking. He can't see real good. And the father comes to a place, he's trying to see who is it and what's all the commotion. He's watching for the son to come home. He flips on the porch light. And then he can just tell by the way the lantern's moving, he can see the swagger of the young son. He knows that cadence of his step. And the father leaves his house. He runs to his young son. And understand, in the culture of Jesus, a father would never, ever run. He was too respected. He would never run. Especially, he would never run to one who had wasted his reputation and had gone against him. He would never run to one that had squandered things like this young son had squandered them. Yet Jesus says the father saw him a long way off. And he ran out and he grabbed him up. And this son has practiced this line 1,000,000 times by now on his way home, stumbling in the darkness with this little candle of a light. Dad, I've messed up. I blew it. I don't even want to be your son anymore. Just let me be a servant in your house. And it's like the father can't even hear him. He doesn't hear anything the son says. He just says, listen. He grabs his servants. Hey, listen, he's home. He's home. Go get the robe. Go get the robe. Bring the best robe in the house and put it on his shoulders. And the robe meant you were part of the family again. Bring a ring and put it on his fingers, and bring shoes and put them on his feet. The father can't even hear the bit about a servant. He's fully reestablishing him as a son that he loves dearly, a son that he would run to greet, a son that he would welcome home. It's miraculous. It's unexpected. And the father rejoices so much. He's like, hey, listen, go kill that fatted calf, man. We're gonna barbecue, baby. We're gonna have a party like none other. Let's get this thing going, because my son, he was dead and now he's home, and it's awesome. Awesome. I love this story. But Jesus doesn't stop there. That's just about one son. The party's going on, and the older brother is coming back from the fields. I imagine that the party had been going on all day. The young son had gotten up early and hit the fields and was doing what the older son does. That is to be respectful and to carry out the work of the household and to expand it, to make it better, and to protect the reputation of the father, and to be religious and devout in his service of the father. And the older son is coming home. Like, what is going on? He's standing outside. And don't miss this. The older son is mad. And he's pouting. He's brooding. But don't miss this. The father comes out to him too. The father comes to him and says, hey, why are you out here? Why are you here? Come on. Come on in. Come to this party. And the older son won't even hear it. He's like, no, I'm not coming in. That son of yours, that horrible, wasted life, awful son of yours. Not my brother, your son. Who blew everything, who made a mockery of you and of me and of our whole family. You're just going to welcome him home? You're just going to throw a party for him? You've never even killed a goat for me, much less taken the most expensive animal on the farm and killed it to throw a party. You've never done anything for me. And Jesus leaves the story wide open. You see, the one that we assume was lost is found, and the one that thought he was found is indeed lost. You see, the heart of the older brother, the older sister, is a religious heart. It's a heart that assumes, I'm doing it all right. I deserve the Father's love. I've earned the Father's love. The news of the story is this: the Father is love. The Father loves because that's who He is. So whether you've been religious your whole life and you've always gotten it right, or whether you've blown it and you've been far from God, the Father loves you. And He welcomes you home. And He's inviting you to come on into the party. Come on in, let's go. He loves you whether you've been religious or whether you've been far away. But He leaves you with a choice. Your life will be as you wish. You can either stay out or you can come home. And Jesus' news, the news of the resurrection, that this teacher, Jesus, is the greatest, most powerful, smartest, wisest teacher ever, who when He teaches you about the Father and who He is, you can trust it. He's saying, why don't you come home? Why don't you come home? Come home to a Father who lets you live as you wish, who will throw a party when you come home, who invites you from the pig pen back into the light of the porch to stop pouting and to come home. Come home. That's the story. That's the good news of Jesus Christ. Would you pray with me? So God, right now, wherever this story finds us, whatever part of the story we're in, whether we're the young son or the old son, whether we feel like we're in or we're out, God, would you just break our hearts, help us to come home, help us to live as your children, as your sons, and as your daughters, as ones who are dearly loved. Help everyone here, God, to return home because you were love. Now, with your heads bowed and your eyes closed, just listen. However this story hits you, wherever you are, I welcome you home. I welcome you back to the Father, back to the one who loves you more than you could imagine. Now, in the moments ahead, would you consider coming home? Would you consider returning to the Father? Living in a fellowship with Him? The kind of fellowship that Jesus promised? Would you consider that? Just asking you as you hear this song and you maybe even sing this song with us that you come home. That's our hope.
I'm staring out into the night, trying to hide the pain. I'm going to a place where love and feeling good don't ever cost a thing. 'Cause the pain you feel's a different kind of pain. I'm going home to a place where I belong, where your love has always been enough for me. I'm not running from, no, I think you've got me all wrong. Don't regret this life you chose for me. But these faces and these faces are getting old. Oh, I'm going home. I'm going home.
So the story that Jesus tells is more than a story. It's who God is. It's how He loves. It's how He welcomes you home. Jesus was the ultimate big brother. Not a religious big brother, but one who actually makes it possible for you to come home. One who actually says, hey, come home, and I'm even going to run out and greet you. You see, the ordinary big brother, what would the story be like if the big brother had intercepted the young son? What would the big brother have said to him? This is what he would have said. He would have said, Dad is so mad at you. He hates you. He can't stand you. He's done with you. You've ruined the family name. He doesn't even like you anymore. Yeah, you get on over there in the servants' quarters and you work your way back, and if you're good enough someday, maybe you'll get back in. But for now, he hates you and I hate you and everybody else does too. So good luck. Welcome home, jerk. That's what a big brother says, normally. And some of you guys, I got to tell you, some of you are so religious, that's what it sounds like when you're talking to people that are far from God. It sounds like that, and that's not the heart of the Father at all. The heart of the Father says, man, you're welcome. I love you. Come on home. Come on home.